On our interview segment this week, we talked to former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice in Ekiti State, Mr. Olawale Fapohunda. I began by asking him about the cabinet, especially as it relates to justice sector ministries.
I think the composition of the Buhari, the ministers, provides an important opportunity for reforms in the justice sector. And I say this apart from the stated commitment of the administration to reforms. I say this also because of the array of lawyers, of persons with expertise in law and justice matters in the cabinet. We have 4 senior advocates. The Vice President, who initiated this whole reform drive as Attorney General of Lagos State. We have the Minister of Works, Power and Housing, who under his watch, Lagos State progressively implemented some far-reaching reforms in the justice sector. We have the Attorney General, and we have the Minister of State for Labor. In addition, there are also other lawyers. You have the Minister of Youth and Sports, who has personal experience in prisons and penal reform matters. We have the Minister of Women Affairs, who is a former Attorney General, who also has extensive experience with respect to the administration of the judiciary. And of course, you have the Minister of Communication, who is a former Attorney General of Oyo State. Now, in addition to that team of lawyers, you also have those who have worked extensively in the area of administration of justice. The Minister for Solid Minerals has vast experience in particularly international justice. You also have the Minister for Environment, who are together on the board of the National Human Rights Commission, who also works, has experience in the area of human rights. So given this array of persons, I think the reasonable conclusion is that change has indeed come to the justice sector. Any other thing other than that will be deeply disappointing.
Let's narrow it down to the Attorney General of the Federation, because I know you've talked about all the lawyers in the cabinet and what the experiences that they have that they will bring to bear. But let's talk about the Attorney General, Mr. Abubakar Malami, SAN. He's a very key person in the administration of justice. What do you think his first steps should be?
First, I think it's pleasing that the debate about the appointment is over, or should be over. We have a sitting Attorney General. I think what we all should do now is to rally around him and provide the necessary support. Now, if you ask me, I think the number one thing he needs to do is to put together a policy and action plan for the justice sector. The business of administration of justice is too important to be administered on an ad hoc basis, on a rolling basis. And he doesn't need, to go far to find the relevant literature to put this together. So what is important, I think, is for him now to put those, particularly the key intervention areas together. Now, having said that, it is important that he gets the buy-in of Mr. President. The reason why we have not made progress, particularly over the last 16 years, with respect to reforms in the justice sector, is because we have not had that high-level buy-in. And if you ask me, the narrative is simple. The Attorney General should go and meet the President and tell him that his vision of enhanced security, economic growth, and anti-corruption will not be achieved if we do not invest, or if he does not provide leadership for the justice sector. Having said so, the President, he must ensure, or he must work with the President to have a conversation with other branches of government. Now, I know people talk about separation of power, but separation of power does not mean we should live in separate islands. In my view, the President must have a conversation with judiciary to what kind of judiciary do we want for Nigeria. I do not think, a calm conversation about the state of judiciary in Nigeria and the expectations of the judiciary will go against, the principles of separation of power. Having said that, there's also the need to engage the National Assembly. We need a legislative agenda for the justice sector. That conversations need to be had. That conversation need to be had. Now, the Seventh Assembly, in fairness to them, passed some very far-reaching laws. National Human Rights Commission Act Amendment Bill, which gave us one of the most progressive human rights commissions anywhere in the world. The Legal Aid Council Act Amendment Bill, and of course the Admission of Criminal Justice Act, which revolutionized how we look at our criminal justice system. We need to build on that. We need to look at the Police Act. We need to look at the Prisons Act. Now, apart from having a legislative framework, it's also important because whatever progress we make at the federal level, if it does not get to the states, Nigerians will not feel the impact of reforms. And that, again, is one of the problems we've had. Some progress have been made at the federal level, but the experience at the states have been mixed. So it's important that the president sits with 36 state governors and agree on an agenda for intervention. Now, the experience of the states have been mixed. We have Lagos that has done very well. Other states like Jigawa has also done very well, particularly in the area of access to justice. We have Anambra, we have Enugu. So the experience have been mixed. In Ekiti also, under my watch, we made progress. Before we started beating up judges, we made tremendous progress in some areas. So I think that's the conversation we need to have on the whole.
But in some states like Rivers, where the courts have been locked up, absolutely, and all of that.
So we need to have that conversation. We need to agree. The the vision of the Attorney General must necessarily include, presidential buy-in in a manner that also recognizes the states, that recognizes that states are an important component of the delivery process. So ultimately, the Attorney General should run it, but if it doesn't get presidential buy-in, we are not likely to make progress at that level.
But what do you think should be the legislative agenda of the National Assembly? Because I know that you also said that the National Assembly should key in.
Lawmaking. We have a police act, for example, that was last reviewed in 1968. It is not relevant to the police force today. It is not relevant to Nigerians. To our needs. 1968 was last reviewed in 1968. So that's where you keep having concerns about accountability, about transparency, about impunity. We need to review that. We have issues with the prisons. The Prisons Act was last reviewed in 1972. Again, it is not relevant, to the prisons penal system of Nigeria today.
About 40 years.
So we need to look at these laws again. But I think another crucial component, apart from the lawmaking process, is the appropriation process. We need to prioritize administration of justice. I noticed that many of the parliamentarians do not see the justice sector institutions, committees, as desirable. So we need to reverse that. We need to come to a situation where the National Assembly and indeed the State House of Assembly will recognize that the very essence, the very future of our country largely depends on our ability to get the justice system right. So, we need to engage. We need to ensure that the National Assembly prioritizes justice sector reform. And that, again, translates into appropriation. We have to fund the justice system. There's no point in, all these expectations from the police, from the judiciary, and what have you, without putting appropriate funding. And it's not just appropriation, making sure that even through their oversight, that these institutions get the benefit of the appropriation.
Okay, so we've talked about prison, we've talked about the police, we've talked about justice sector reforms, the Ministry of Justice, but what are the key concerns of justice sector stakeholders?
The first concern is political will. The level of cynicism about the ability of government, whether on the federal or the state level, to make sustainable changes in the justice sector has been a major concern over the years. We've had several attempts, ad hoc attempts, aimed at, making progress in reforms, but somehow we have not achieved it. The consequence of that is that if you talk to government justice institutions, whether you talk to civil society justice institutions, there are concerns about the ability of government to progress. Hopefully, that will begin to change. The narrative now will begin to change. Now, if you talk about institutions, several, judiciary, concerns about judiciary. Now, when we talk about judiciary, people always look at the Supreme Court and even the High Court, the Court of Appeal and the High Court. But in my view, the bulk of the issue really lies with the lower courts. More than 80% of Nigerians who come into conflict with law are dealt with at that level. Now, our magistrates suffer some of the worst conditions of public service, and these are cross board. So, in all states, it varies. Lagos will say we've done better than in other states, but if you take the mean average, magistrates in Nigeria suffer some of the worst conditions of public service, whether in terms of remuneration, whether in terms of the physical facilities in which they work in, whether in terms of endowment. So we have issues with the judiciary. Now, of course, we have ongoing issues with the police. I mentioned that it is tragic that in 2015, the Nigerian police force is still, governed by 1968 law. We need to reform the legal framework of the Nigerian police. We have suggested severally that the Nigerian prisons today has no place in the Ministry of Interior.
So where should it go?
Ministry of Justice. We think if it's properly placed within the Ministry of Justice, we can have, some movement towards at least achieving justice for the inmates. The other issue we continue to have is that no matter how we talk about, support for the inmates, no matter how we complain about the poor conditions of prisons and how our inmates are lumped together, if we do not focus on the interest of prison officers themselves, we will continue to struggle. Prison officers today, again, like magistrates, suffer horrendous conditions of public service. Another issue I even have is that for me, it's sad that the Controller General of Prisons is not a member of the Security Council. The Federal Security, and in some states, the Controller General of Prisons is there. And that tells you, how relevant we even see the prisons within the framework of administration of justice generally in the country. Now, so we've talked about police, we've talked about prisons, access to justice institutions, ministries of justice. One of the reasons, again, why we don't make progress is because across board, whether I talk about the federal, whether I talk about states, state council are poorly endowed. Recently, the lawyers in the Federal Ministry of Justice went on strike. Never happened in this country. And that was after repeated attempts to get people to listen to them, that their conditions were not acceptable. We need to invest in, institutions like the Ministry of Justice and other institutions that follow. So across board, we need to, the concern is that the inability of federal government to invest in the justice sector invariably affects the sector.
That's our interview and the program for this week, but let's continue the conversation online. Remember that you can find these and past episodes of the program on our YouTube channel. I'm Shola Sheeli. Thank you for watching.